What is life? Why am I here? How is it all connected? And how am I going to navigate this beautiful but crazy journey? I'm Sylvia and welcome to the Soul Sunshine Podcast. Today I'm talking to Avis Mulhall. Avis is a multifaceted woman who has spent a life creating work that creates positive impact for people as well as the planet. Being deeply entrenched in the changemaker community in Sydney for years, she was advocating for social innovation, social enterprise, and simply doing good so we can create a more positive future. Leaving Australia and resettling in Europe, currently in France, Avis created Wolf and Rose as a way of sharing the practices and medicines that have served her so faithfully on her journey of healing. Avis offers her work as an act of sacred reciprocity because these practices and ways of being saved her life, and each day they continue to liberate her and those she loves. Avis created Wolf and Rose, a living wisdom school dedicated to the rising feminine, acting in service to the plants and all of life. What can I say? She's an incredible human and a powerhouse of a woman, and I am so excited to finally have her here with me today as my first guest in 2023. Welcome to the Soul Sunshine Podcast, Avis. It's so good to see you here today.
Thank you. It was a bit of a mission getting here. It's taken a while, but it's perfect timing and beautiful to be the first guest of the year.
Yeah, it's amazing. I know we've been trying to plan this podcast since June last year?
Yeah,
and we had it scheduled so many times and it just wasn't aligned, right? There was something in the stars. It just didn't want to happen. And we're like, let's just trust the process. It will happen when it wants to happen. And new year, and here we are.
Here we are.
You're sitting in France. I'm sitting in Sydney. And yeah, we're finally doing it.
It's one of those things I always, just kind of go, well, if it's not working out now, it's just because there's something percolating, right? There's something that wants to come through today that wasn't quite ready, or something along those lines. And so when I respond in that way and kind of just drop back into that trust that, if it's not working out now, it's just going to be even better. Like, how much better is life that way?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly how I think about it. No pressure for today, right? But it's going to be awesome. So, Avis, before we are heading into our conversation today, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. So today we're going to be talking about Avis's life journey that led her to creating Wolf and Rose. We're deep diving into what the work is that Avis offers at Wolf and Rose and how she is supporting women in connecting with the divine feminine. We are also exploring the secrets of shamanic menstruation, rose initiations, and what it means to be a medicine woman. We are learning how Avis is being of service while creating positive impact in people with the gifts that she is offering. So I'm really looking forward to dive deep into all of those topics today with you, because we did have a little bit of a pre-chat, and yeah, there's just so much wonderful wisdom that you are holding in those areas, really. Avis, we met years ago, didn't we?
Yeah, a long
Sydney,
time ago.
Back in the day. It feels like back in the day when the changemaker community started in Sydney. You were running Think Act Change, which you can just tell us really quickly what Think Act Change was.
Yeah, well, I just, reflecting on that time in Sydney is really, really profound, actually, because what we were doing then was really starting this changemaker community from scratch, from zero. And I had just arrived in the country. And after a near-death experience, after my first year there, I just ended up starting to connect with people on Twitter because I couldn't leave the hospital. I couldn't leave the house. And I saw that there was lots of events happening. And yet there was no place for us to just kind of hang out and really talk about what I termed shit that just matters, right? Like this emergent theme of, well, what are we here to change? What are the problems? And I remember a bunch of us just got together for a dinner and we're talking about, creating a space for people. And it eventually turned into Hub Sydney, right? But I was like, well, fuck it. Why wait for the infrastructure? And I was like, let's just get together every month and just talk. And it started that way. And the first time there was, 13 people in a pub. The second time there was about 30 people in a pub. And by the end, there was up to 300 people plus meeting every month to talk about topics that, to be honest, were just emergent at the time. I think they're in the common narrative now, but back then we were talking about plastic pollution and hormone disruptors in our food. We were talking about the climate crisis and, plastic pollution and waste and how we can create futures without waste. And we were talking about sex trafficking and anything in between. And it was very, I keep saying the word emergent, because I would just bring to that conversation what was alive in me. And I feel like that's what was so different at the time. And you look around, cities now, and there's heaps of these events. You can't swing a cat without smacking one in the face. But back then, it really was something that was needed. And I just did it for the love of it. I had no idea it was going to come so big, and it was going to become the foundation of my life in Australia and the foundation of my friendships. And to be honest, social change was, the key factor in my awakening process. And I think it's something that people underestimate. Some people come to social change after their spiritual awakening, but for so many of us, it's looking at the world and questioning the world, questioning the narratives. Why is it this way? Why are we doing this? What is wrong with this in society? And realizing that so many of the stories that we grew up with, so many of the common narratives that we have accepted as normal our entire lives are so flawed, so faulty. And when we just dip into those, it shatters our illusions around the world and the stories that we hold on it. And that in and of itself, if you're anyway self-reflective, will lead to a spiritual awakening, will lead to your liberation. And it's questioning those stories, the stories within and the stories that we hold collectively, that is the key to our liberation.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important point that you're making there as well. And I've had this discussion with a few people actually on the podcast as well, the importance of questioning and the importance of not just taking everything the way it gets presented to you, or like you said, even the stories that you're telling yourself or that you've been telling yourself for years, where do they come from and are they still valid, So really kind of being a little bit of a detective there and starting to, dig a little bit deeper and not just taking everything the way you hear it.
Completely. And, at the time when people would talk to me about Think Act Change and what it was, and I was like, look, I'm just here to ignite people's curiosity. Like, I can't change them. I don't want to change them. But if you can, and this goes for yourself, if you can just live with that holy curiosity alive within you, then, life will unfold before you, and it will shift and it will change, and the paradigm within which you live will completely alter and change. And for me, that spark of holy curiosity is the beginnings of so much. And I saw that within the community. People would come along because they were interested in one topic, and they were like, well, shit, I had no idea about food and our food systems and sugar or, hormones or any of these kind of off the wall topics, and then that would make them kind of go, well, if that's not true, well, what else isn't? Or if I have had this view on this topic for my whole entire life and it's just been completely blown apart in one night, what else am I just accepting? What else am I blind to? And it's not about, becoming this. I think the challenge is to walk that, center way of not just becoming this person who's against things. It's, can we move from this space of love? Like, what is it that motivates us to create change? When we're in anger, when we're in frustration, that can be a really beautiful beginning point to spark change. But as a motivator, the foundations upon which you build are everything. And if you build on anger, if you build on otherness, if you build on righteousness, that I'm right and you're wrong, whatever you create will topple. And what I've realized in the changemaker space after seeing so many people, including myself, burn out is that, it's only when we act from a space of pure love, and love is a word that we don't hear enough in change making. It's a word that we don't hear enough in social entrepreneurship. But it's that foundation of love for self. Like, how am I looking after myself? How am I nurturing myself? How is this actually fulfilling me? And, is this thing that I'm doing, this way of being, is it because I love the earth? If I'm protecting the earth, is it because I love the earth? Or am I just really pissed off with miners, right? Am I just against them? And one of the biggest lessons I learned on this was when I was at Standing Rock, and I have had a tendency to be an angry activist in the past, right? And I think we all have. And, that anger, that rage, that fury is so valid. But what I realized is when I went to Standing Rock, I remember meeting this beautiful elder called Wonase. They chased the buffalo. And, this was just before all of the attacks, maybe a few days beforehand. So tensions were really rising. And what Wonase said to me really stayed with me. He said that, we're not against you, Dapple. We're not against you. We love you. We just think it's time to stop destroying the earth. And he told me that, we're praying for them. We're praying for them. And another gentleman I spoke to there, he was like, I saw one of those police women crying tears. And she knew she was on the wrong side, but she's got a family. She's got children to feed. And, this is the complexity within which we work in social change and in life. When we judge people just by the surface of what's happening, we're missing out on the point. When we are against someone, we're already losing. And so, if we want to create complete change, we have to create it from a completely different place. I've seen so many times over the years people creating social enterprises, and really what they're doing is just creating a business but then sticking on a social impact message at the end. And I was okay with that for a while. I was like, well, it's better than nothing. And it is, it's a stepping stone. But then I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a pedicurist, right? And she was like, it drives me fucking nuts when I see people just painting their toenails without the pedicure. And she told me, she was like, it's like polishing a turd. And I was like, that's what we're doing. We're taking the turd of capitalism and we're just putting a shiny coat on top. And it's like, no. We need to rewrite that entire foundation. And that entire foundation needs to come down. We need to dig new foundations and go so deep into the motherfucking earth that we know where we're coming from and that we're creating from that place of depth and descent and darkness. And that is the birthplace of all of life. That is the birthplace of all beauty, when you are so deeply connected to what came before you, to the earth. Everything that you create from that place will be on new, solid foundations, will be deeply rooted, grounded in the earth, in yourself, in your relationship to the earth. And when you create from that space, what you're looking and aiming to do is to create from your own medicine. So much of the time we're looking around, and as young people especially, we're like, oh my God, I'm really inspired by that person. And so we emulate them because we want to live a life like that. But what we do in that case is we're bypassing our own gifts, bypassing our own medicine, bypassing the thing that naturally grows from within us. And if it doesn't naturally grow from within us, what will happen is we'll burn out, because we need to constantly be looking outside of ourselves to source that energy. Whereas when it's actually coming from us, from our own life force energy, that source is infinite, and we can't burn out when we're actually giving from what is naturally ours. And I remember hearing a beautiful woman speak about this, and what she said is that when you give something that's not yours to begin with, you make the other person a thief. So you think you're being generous, but really that other person, it's not yours to give. And so it's not a true gift. A true gift is something that comes from within you and is given in generosity and willingly. And that was a real paradigm shift for me, especially after burning out, because the urgency in the world right now, like that urgency to create change, to shift before everything falls to pieces, when that urgency gets in the way, it's sometimes, we gaslight ourselves and we push because we're like, well, I can't wait. I can't wait for my own medicine to grow. I just need to do something and I need to do it now. And the irony is, and this ties into a lot of the work that I do now, is that sometimes the best thing we can do is absolutely nothing. Because again, we need to break all of the stories that we've been told about our self-worth, about what it means to be of use in society, about what it means to be a change maker. And I don't really like using these terms anymore because I remember when I was voted in top 100 people of influence and I didn't even know it was a thing, right? I thought it was one of those junk mails that I got. I was like, what is this? And, I'd only been in the country a year, and on the day that it happened, I remember my ex-boyfriend had broken up with me and I sent my friend an email and I was like, I never even wanted to be a change maker. Other people called me that and I just want to curl up into a ball and disappear. And it was everyone will create an idea of who you are based on their own projections. And it's very rarely right. And if you try and live into what other people expect of you, again, you're lost. And this is the challenge for so many people, and especially women. We're constantly being told to fit back in the box, to, you're not loud enough, you're too loud, you're too timid, you're obnoxious, you're a bit of a prude, oh, you're a slut, and it's we're bombarded from all angles about who we are, what we should be. Our family tells us that we're one person. And then we're like, oh, well, if I'm not that, then who am I? And that's the most terrifying question that we don't want to sit with. We don't want to go into the silence. We don't want to rest. We don't want to do nothing because that question, well, if I'm not the change maker, if I'm not the mother, if I'm not this, if I'm not that, well, then who am I and what is my worth?
Because your worth is projected onto external things, right? And external identities that people give to you.
Yes, and the change maker identity it's a sneaky one, yeah? Because it's noble. And then other people try to live up to that. And so what I was always trying to do was at these Think Act Change meetings was just take the pedestal out before people tried to put me on it, even by as simple as sometimes there'd be a stage and instead of sitting on the chairs on top of the stage, I'd get everyone to sit on the edge. I'd pull the chairs down and go, let's just sit closer to everyone. And it's those simple acts of other people will put you on a pedestal when they think you're doing good things. And it's it's so tempting to stay on that pedestal. And sometimes it's up to us to just go, no. I'm coming down off of that. And that's not a reflection of a lack of self-worth. That's a reflection of my self-worth is not created by what other people think of me. And so this taking of space, this taking of rest, this dropping into emptiness and nothingness, if we can find our self-worth there, then nothing and nobody can stop us. Because, if we remember who we are and where we came from, and an elder once told me this at Standing Rock as well, when we remember who we are, when we remember why we came here, nothing and nobody can stop us. Because we're energized by source. We're energized by the divine. We're on our path. And there is no wrong way because you're on the path. And, that goes right back to what we were saying at the beginning. It'll work out in perfect timing.
Yeah. And so, how did your journey unfold to get to that space where you are now? You have lived through all those, I guess, identities that other people have put on yourself, that you've put on yourself. You've had some ups and downs that I would like to go into a little bit more as well. But how did your journey get there, Was there always that curiosity, like you called it, that holy curiosity about things, and that need to create something, to change, to make the world a better place, really? Or do you now see that as identities as well? And where have you landed at this point in time? And how did you get there?
Oh, look, it's not linear. And I think that's the most important thing to remember is it's never linear. And we spiral around these things and certain areas of the journey will be more alive at different points in our life. And no, I wasn't always someone who was curious about the world. I was very much asleep for a lot of my life. When I look back on my early childhood, I was always, fascinated by, I was so fascinated by animals. I was very empathetic to animals, and I was just really caring in that regard. But I guess in my journey, one of the most, I think, impactful things that ever happened in my life is my father dying when I was 8, right? And when we look at our life journey and our core wounding and our relationships and our relationship to life, we all carry core woundings. And one of mine is that early abandonment of the sacred masculine in my life. And when I look at pretty much anything in my life, it's affected by that still, right? The depth to which it's affecting my life is very different now. My awareness around it is very different now. But, that loss, that grief is what has shaped who I am, and you think about a sculptor sculpting, that it's their hands that will shape it, and it's our experiences that will shape us. It doesn't mean we don't have any free will in that, but that experience definitely has colored my entire existence and how I am in the world. And I guess what it did was it put me to sleep for a very long time. And in a very simple way, I was very wealthy growing up, but when my father passed, we lost all that wealth. And so I had this very inner child story for much of my 20s, which was if I can get the money back, if I can just buy the big house, if I can, literally, I wanted to buy the house I grew up in back, and I was like, if I can just do that, then things will be okay again, right? And so I was so driven. I worked in recruitment and executive search, and by the time I was 27, I was earning a 6-figure salary, in Australian dollars. It was the equivalent of $250,000. And, I bought my house, I had my car, I had a boyfriend of 7 years. And, I played the rat race, and I played it well. Yeah, I was I'm going to go in there. I'm going to be a chameleon. I could be whoever you want me to be to make the sale. And I won the rat race. Yeah. And I was fucking miserable. And I looked around me, and it was it was a real eat, pray, love moment. Yeah. I remember,
awakening,
I had been having this argument with my boyfriend at the time over something stupid. I think it was because I didn't want to watch TV in the evenings, or something small. And for 3 days in a row, this was going on. And I remember coming home one night, and I was just had a really shit day in work, got stuck in traffic. It took me 3 hours to get home. I was standing at my front door with my key in my hand, and I was just going, and then I saw myself do that, and I was like, what am I doing? And I was like, oh my God, I'm preparing myself for the argument on the other side of the door. He was very verbally abusive and at times physically abusive. And I was I just heard this voice going, what the fuck are you doing? What the fuck are you doing? And, at that time, that was what I thought I was worth. I would hold on to any bit of what I thought love was because I thought that's all I was worth. I didn't have that awareness at the time. And so I opened the door, and there he was, smack in my face, just ready to argue with me. And a week before this, he had strangled me up against the wall because I didn't put the trash out, yeah? And the next morning I came downstairs, and I was furious. I was waiting for him to get up, and he came downstairs, and he was like, are you going to fucking apologize to me? And that was one of those moments that I talk about stories shattering. Because of the gaslighting I'd had with him for 7 years, I was oh, maybe I am the wrong one. I'm wrong. But it was so obvious that one time. I was no. And then it was just it was every single argument replayed in my head all at once. And I was oh, it's not me. Yeah. And so I was standing at the door with that key and I was like, oh, I'm afraid to go into my own house. I'm not doing this anymore. And I walked in and he was there and I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. And he's like, what are you going to do? Leave me? And I was like, yes, yes, I am. And I rang my brother and I was like, you need to come get me. And my family hated him. And so my brother like, hightailed it to me and it was like, come on, I'll help you. And packed up my entire house. And I just left, and from there I quit my job and it's a very white thing to do. I was like, what am I going to do? And I was like, I'm going to go to Africa. And so I went and I lived in Africa and I volunteered for a year.
Was that a moment where you realized that the whole life that you were living wasn't really
It was a lie.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to work in an office. I don't want to be here. And I haven't wanted this for a really long time. I remember moving in with him and just sitting on the couch the first night and all I could feel was dread. And I was just like, I kept on doing things I didn't want to do. And it was like...
Why do you think you did that?
Because I didn't believe in my own worth. I didn't believe the voice in my head that was saying, this is wrong for you. And that's why I was saying, this voice of God, so much of the time we're praying for guidance. But like what I realized one day was like that voice of God, that voice of love was just telling me shit I didn't want to do because it was too scary. And again, it ties back to, my father. Like I didn't want to be alone. I was afraid to be alone.
And afraid to lose that masculine part in your life again.
Yeah, afraid to lose that little, like tiny scratch of love. And, after he would do something really horrific, then he would come home and he'd have flowers and he'd leave magazines around for me and he'd be so full of love. And it was like this love bombing. And I was like, oh, I've got a little bit of love, And so I'm going to hold on to this. And it was the only, it's what I thought love was, right? And, one of the biggest journeys that we're here as human beings is to discover what is love actually. Yeah, it's not like a Christmas movie. But it's a very good Christmas movie there. But, at that time, I thought that was love. But really, that was my trauma. That was my trauma of my childhood playing out and going, hey, this is going to be really loud. It's going to be really painful because I need you to look at this. And everything that happened in my life was pointing me to, can you please come home to me, to this inner child, and be with her and love her and hold her through it all. And I had spent my life avoiding that depth of pain. Because when you're 8, like, how do you cope with the reality of a father figure dying?
Huge loss.
And then, my mother was lost to me as well, emotionally, physically. We were sent away. And, like I look at my nieces and nephews and when they're 8, I'm like, holy shit, you're so small.
Yeah.
But like I was told by my teachers, like pulled at the funeral by the ear and it was like, you are never to cry.
Oh, wow.
You are not to upset your mother. You have to grow up right now and you have to look after her. And so I did. I thought I was a grown up. They told me I was a grown up. And so, all of the things, the hyper perfectionism, the ambition, the drive to make money, the drive to be seen and validated by these like prizes that I would win in my corporate job. It was always competitive and I was always trying to win because like there was a part of me that just wanted somebody to validate me, see me, hear me, notice me. And it was also unconscious, right? But, this is some of the poison that lives in the corporate world, in the sales world, like when we're constantly validating people through their achievements, through what we define as success, we're just feeding their fucking trauma, keeping them stuck in those loops of like, I need to be perfect. But like, I would have this high at the end of each month. And then at the beginning of the next month, I would be gripped in fear because I had to do it all over again, had to prove myself all over again. And it was, my nervous system was shot.
Yeah.
And so it was no surprise that in my mid-20s, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I was actually 23. And, that illness was trying to just get me to stop. But in my kind of quest for worthiness, instead of it being a call to stop, I was like, I need to prove to everyone that I can do as much as they can, even though I'm sick.
You can still do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm still capable of doing all this. So I'd push myself and push myself and push myself. And I was just destroying myself. There was no love in it because on a subconscious level, I was just like, I just want to be loved. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the journey, I guess, has been about realizing how much of my actions, how much of what I did in my life was driven by my trauma, was driven by, hey, come home to yourself. And, you know, was that inner child in me just kind of having a shit fit because I've been ignoring her all those years.
Do you feel like consciously that's when your journey of healing really started at that point?
Oh, yeah. Like, I think, you know, when I look back, I don't think the journey of healing ever has a beginning or end, right? Because the thread of it goes through our life. It goes through the long story of our soul.
But they're being conscious about it, right?
The conscious side of it didn't even start there, you know, like when I left him, that was just like, all I know is I can't live this way. And, you know, and so I was like, well, fuck it. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was like, well, what's the only thing I've ever wanted to do? And I tapped back into what I wanted when I was a kid. And the only thing I was obsessed with when I was a kid was Africa. I was like, okay. And that's why I chose Africa. I was like, I had no idea who to go to, where to go, but all I knew is I needed to be as far away from him as possible. And I remember having the phone call with this charity. And he was like, look, it's really remote. You can't get there by road. It's a 4-hour journey from the local town. And then you have to hike up a mountain for an hour. It's riddled in malaria and you most likely will get malaria while you're there. And I was like, I am sold, right? Like, I was like, that's it. You know, I want to.
That's great.
Yes, I was like, I want to be as far away from all the humans as is possible, right? And I remember telling my family, and my sister was just like, Avis, what are you going to do? Like, you've got 200 pairs of shoes. You know, it was just like the complete opposite of who I was, right? Like, I had an entire wardrobe of shoes, you know? And I told my doctors, and my doctors were like, you're mad, you know, like, you're absolutely mad, you know? Like, I was on up to 30 pills a day at that time. And they were like, we don't recommend it. And the irony is, in the year that I was in Africa was the wellest I had ever been. And it was ironic at the time, but like I can see, of course, I wasn't stressed out. And there was this moment I remember driving in the, you know, Land Cruiser, very cheesy moment, like flying through these red dust roads on the way to the rainforest. And I just clutched my chest because I was like, oh, wow, what's that? And I was like, what is that? What is that? What is that? And I was like flipping through like my mind to kind of try and identify what this sensation was that was so unfamiliar to me. And I was like, oh, it's freedom. Like, oh, it's like, this is the first time I've made a decision in my entire life that was just for me. And, you know, that was the beginning. That was the beginning of going, I am going to make decisions that make me feel this way inside. And that was the beginning.
Yeah.
It was an embodied, sensed experience of like, I don't even remember the last time I felt free. I don't even remember the last time. Yeah. And I was like, this is what I want to grow. If I'm a gardener, this is what I want to grow in my life. And and so that was kind of the beginning of it, I guess.
And how did your journey unfold after that? So when you came back, like, how did that change your life being back in Australia?
Well, from there, I actually, you know, I was volunteering in Tanzania, and then I went down and I ran a surf and yoga lodge in Mozambique. And it was there that I met who became my best friend, Andrew. And we traveled around Ethiopia together, and we were standing on top of this mountain one day during a 5-day hike. And, you know, he had been very successful in New York, again, making, you know, $250,000, even more money than me. And we were both going like, wow, people need to live like this. Like, this is a good feeling. This is a good way to live. How can we help other people live this way? And how can we create a life where we live this way? And so we decided we'd try and go into business together. And, that was the beginning of my journey with entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. And he was Australian, so he came to Ireland for a while. I went to New York for a while, and we were like, this isn't working. And he was like, let's just go to Australia. And I was like, okay, but like, it's such a typically Irish thing to do, to go to Australia, live in Sydney, hang out with only Irish people. And I was like, look, I'm not fucking living in Sydney. And if I live in Sydney, I'm not living in fucking Bondi. Where did I live for like years? Sydney, Bondi. Yeah.
Of course.
But my friends were Australian, right? For me, I was like, if I'm going to live in Australia, I'm going to hang out with like local people. I'm not going to do this thing where I'm in a bubble. But that was like my, part of that was, beautiful. But part of it was like, I don't want to even be associated with my past, with my Irishness, because I associated it with my old life, with my wounding. And so that's another part of my journey, was healing that years later. And so I got to Australia and I was like, okay, finally, here I am. And what happened, was that the only way that I could get the visa for Australia was I had to work in recruitment. And I was like, okay, but I'm only going to do it part-time. And so here I was, squeezing myself into this thing in order to make something else happen. And I remember the first day walking up into the office, and I had a suit on, and I felt like I was suffocating. And I went into the office and I looked around, and I don't know if it was just me or if it was, but everything was gray. Like gray desks, gray carpet, gray walls, gray people, gray skin, and like compared to the vitality at the beach. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm going to die in here. And surely enough, it was like 5 weeks later, I had to go into hospital. And my surgeon, my doctor, told me that my intestines were about to explode because I had 2 closures in my bowel, in my small intestine, and I had to have an emergency surgery. And so, a couple of days later, I was in, and he was like, look, it should be a pretty straightforward experience. I know it sounds scary, but he's like, it's a keyhole surgery. But he's like, if anything goes wrong, I'm going to cut you right open. You need to know that. But it's a 0.001% chance. And so I had the surgery, and I woke up and I felt like I'd been run over by a fucking truck. And I was like, am I supposed to feel this bad? And then my lungs started filling with water, and I just wasn't able to walk. And he was like, no, you'll be fine. And I went home, and within a day, I was rushed back into hospital pain isn't a word that I can use to describe it, because there is no word to describe that level of torture, And I was rushed back in and had an emergency surgery. It turned out that there was a hole in my bowel, and I had peritonitis, so my entire abdominal cavity was filled with pus. And so they had to take, kind of gross, but they had to take all of my organs out, clean them all, and then put them back in. But then because they had handled all my intestines and my bowel were paralyzed, and so they had to give me an ileostomy bag, which is like a colostomy bag, but it comes off your small intestine. And I was not expecting any of this. And I wake up, and the surgeon's there, and he's like crying, and he's upset. And I was like, why? And he's like, and he showed me my belly, and I just like screamed and passed out. And I had been with a boyfriend at the time, and we met in Africa. And after the first surgery, he had said to me, I'm so relieved that everything went well. Because I remember when I had a surgery like that, and I was told I might have to have a colostomy bag, I said, I'd rather kill myself than have a colostomy bag. And then 2 days later, I waken up and I have a colostomy bag. And he's going, no, I still love you. And I'm like, I don't fucking believe you. And so my worthiness again through the floor. And, that was the beginning of a really, really traumatic journey of healing. I nearly died again. And I had a near-death experience. And, that again is what shaped so much of my life. But, in the perfect movie, I'd have woken up from that surgery and pursued my, unique path, and everything would have been perfect. And in a lot of ways it was, but in a lot of ways I was still trying to prove myself.
When you're talking about your near-death experience, what did that look like for you?
Oh, look, that's something that it can never be described in words. There was a moment where I was being looked after by an intensive care team a pain team of 4 doctors. And I had fentanyl pain patches on my arms. I had a morphine pump. I was pumping religiously. Didn't stop. I was getting repetitive strain injury on my thumb. And then, I was getting direct morphine injections into my abdomen. And, at this point, I wasn't allowed food or water for weeks. I had a little sponge that they would put in my mouth, and I was being fed through a tube, and I had a central line into my heart, and, catheters and my bag, and just like 2 drips. And it was awful. And they didn't know why I wasn't getting better. And the pain medication was not touching the sides, not touching the sides. And then I had a ketamine infusion in my leg, so I was like hallucinating, there was like orchestras in my room at some points, and all sorts of like really creepy, people coming and touching me all over the body. And the pain was just so unimaginable. And I remember the three wise men, like at the bottom of my bed, and my surgeon to my right. And I was in agony, and I was like, 40 some kilos, and I'm like, I'm tall, yeah. And I just said to him, I was like, is the pain going to go away? And he said, I don't know. And I was like, am I going to get better? And he's, I don't know. And then I was like, oh, am I going to die? And he was like, I don't know. And like little tears started rolling down his face. And I was like, oh my God, when your surgeon starts to cry, that's when you're royally fucked, yeah.
You're not in the best place. Shame, yeah.
Yeah, and there came this moment after he left, and I don't know, like time, no idea that whole time I was in hospital because of the amount of drugs. But, I'd had a really bad night, and then it was just like the pain was just so unimaginable. It was never going away. And I was like, I had to just accept that this was it. And that's when I was like, okay, just fucking give me all the pain. Just give it all to me, and, there's lots more that happened. Like I felt a spirit come into the room. I felt the presence of death, like death came for me. And, I had that full moment of like, it was like nothing except sound, right? It was like a hurricane. And then all of a sudden I was in the center of the hurricane, and I could identify each of the noises in this hurricane as all of the things I never said. I love you. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. And all of the opportunities that I wanted to take but didn't take. All of the things I did but didn't want to do. All of the times I said yes when I meant no. And all of the times I really wanted to scream and cry and didn't. And instead went, yeah, I'm okay. And it was just like the total unlived life of Avis Mulhall. And it was like, oh my God, this is fucking biblical. This is Judgment Day. This is that moment where, it's not St. Peter up on his throne judging you. It's you looking back on your life and going, did I actually live? And I was like, no, I didn't. Like on the outside, it looked like I did, but I really didn't. And, then there was this moment of going, okay, I'm ready to go. But like so much grief of like, I'm never going to be outside this room, this bed. I'm never going to feel the air. I'm never going to be in the ocean again. I'm never going to do any of these things. But I was like, okay, but I'm ready to go. But then death came along and placed this beautiful, perfect, and heavy little baby in my arms. And I smelt her, and I felt the warmth of her. And the grief of never having been a mother, the grief of not looking in her eyes, the grief of not birthing her and feeling her broke me. And like the internal scream in me literally tore through dimensions. And I was like, I'm going back. I have to go back. And I did. And it was like, that's the only thing that can pierce the veils. Yeah, the only thing that can pierce the veils is love. When we're giving birth as mothers, as women, we're screaming, but it's the love that opens the veil to let the spirit through in that pain, in that grief. And that was my moment of birth. That was my moment of spiritual surrender. And I was like, okay, give it all to me. Give me all the pain. And I felt it all, but it was from that place of, I'm going to give birth to this little one. Little did I know that was symbolic. It was like giving birth to myself, you know, and that changed so much, you know, changed so much. And like, you know, 10, 12 years later, I'm still integrating that, you know, and it still shapes a lot of who I am. And particularly in this phase I'm in now, which is menopause, right? And I'm like, well, shit, like I never had the baby, you know? And ironically, 2 years ago, this, I think next week, I found myself in hospital again with the exact same pain. And what I realized was I never fulfilled my contract. And so death was coming for me again, yeah? And so I had to rewrite that contract. I had to go, okay, what is it that I want for my life? And the truth came through is that I'm actually too tired in this lifetime to be a mom. And that was really painful. And that, like, so much my soul wanted to be a mother. I wanted to give birth. I wanted to have that experience of like opening those veils again, you know, of seeing life coming through from the other side, of touching that great vastness again. And the grief of also knowing I was with a younger man who really wanted a family. And I was like, okay. But in that moment, I had to decide, like, what do I really want? And again, you know, what do I want instead of what everyone else around me wants? And
what are you here for, right?
And like, and I can feel, you know, there's so much I want to birth, but I also know my limitations. And we're taught in this, like, you know, world to like break through your limitations, and, you know, there are no limits. And it's like, well, yeah, actually, if you've got kids, limits are really fucking good, yeah. And when we know
they do definitely exist,
yeah,
yes.
And when we know our limits, we can thrive within them. When we ignore our limits, we constantly push ourselves. And so I looked realistically at my life from a soul perspective, and I was like, no, like, I want to give birth. I want to do that. I want to be pregnant. I want all these bits, but do I want to parent for the rest of my life? And the answer was no. Like, I literally just got my life back. After all this healing, I literally just got my life back. And
yeah, it's like you said, you birthed yourself again, right?
And, you know, I want to spend this lifetime in service to the divine. I want to spend this lifetime opening up that channel to those realms, to the divine, and just, you know, let her give birth through me constantly. And so, yeah, I'll be a mother, but I'll be the mother, yeah? And so, you know, after that happened, like, I literally, you know, bled for 15 days and like dived fully into menopause. And that was, you know, my body going, okay, you know, this is the new deal. And so, you know, if I kind of come back to that first question of like, what's the path? The path is listening to my body, listening to what's coming through my body. What is the embodied experience? What is the felt sense of this? Does this feel true? And to be honest, answering that question would have been impossible for me 25 years ago, because I was never in my body. I was not embodied, because to be in my body as a child was a dangerous place because of the level of grief, because of the level of trauma, because of the level of aloneness. And so, you know, what are we doing here? We're coming home to ourselves. We're coming home to our bodies so that we can listen to that voice of the divine within, so that we can listen to the wisdom that is innate, that comes through us, to us, and so that we can give birth to medicine, our medicine, not other people's medicines, not emulating somebody else, and not also being attached to the medicine you give birth to, knowing that it's not yours, just like your children are not yours. And in all of the work I do, that's what it is. When I teach people how to relate to the plants, you know, I'm not saying this is what the rose does. I'm saying, hey, you come sit with the rose. I'll sing with you. I'll be with you. I'll midwife you as you go into the darkness, as you remove yourself from the world and go into the darkness, and you go meet her. I'll show you how to meet her. I'm a midwife. I'm a doula, right? And it's the same with the work of the blood. You know, people think they just menstruate every month and then they just like bleed on a tampon and a pad and they chuck it away because that's what we've been taught, right? But what if your blood is holy? What if your cycle is actually like picking up a direct dial phone line to your ancestry, to your inner medicine, to the wisdom that is in your DNA, to your lineage? And so what I do is I go, hey, here's a map. This is how to get in touch with your own inner compass. This is how to remember the wisdom that lies within your own being. And how do you do that? You drop back into the time of the cycle, the rhythm of the cycle, instead of patriarchal time, instead of chronos time, which goes A to Z. I'm like, here is a pathway with the plants or with the blood that will drop you into kairos time, will drop you into original time, the time where you are connected with the divine, where you are connected with your divine nature. And the irony is that like the biggest medicine we'll ever experience in our lifetimes, it's right in us. It's encoded in us. And it's like right there in our menstrual blood. And it has the capacity to change not only our lives, but our entire communities, our workplaces.
But I think you've said something really important there as well, with when you said, 25 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to see that, and I think that is something that comes with, getting older, growing, experiencing certain things and learning and really going on this journey. Because even if I'm looking at myself now, like when you're talking about the menstrual cycle, it affects me so much these days. And I know exactly where I am and how I'm reacting to things and what's happening. Well, back in the day, I didn't. But didn't I not do it? Or was I just not aware of it? It might have played out exactly the same way, but I might have just not been aware of it. Well, now I'm aware of it, that I can work with it and I don't have to push against it, like you said, the way it is in our society, very much like just get on with it, like take some painkillers, put in a tampon, whatever it is, and
plug it up.
Life goes on. Exactly. Meanwhile, that's not the case. But I do want to go a little bit more into that side of things. But before we dive a little bit deeper into that, because I'm really interested in, the different cycles and how that works in a little bit more detail. But just tell us a little bit about Wolf and Rose in general, and like, thank you for sharing your beautiful story. It's a crazy but beautiful story, that you've been through. But coming out of all of that, doing a lot of beautiful work and now founding Rose and Wolf, like, what are you trying to achieve with that? How are you supporting and helping, other women, especially with the wisdom that you have accumulated throughout your lifetime so far?
Well, I guess when, I look at that question, what are you trying to achieve? And, I can't answer that because in founding Wolf and Rose, what I've done is like, I've handed myself over, like I've had so many ceremonies being with the rose or being with my blood or being with myself or sitting at my altar every day. And it's like, these beings, these plants, these ways, they saved me. They saved my life. After all those experiences, I started meditating. Then I worked with the plants and I worked with lots of different modalities. And these ways saved my life. They showed me these patterns. They showed me how to heal myself, how to heal others. And so, like you said at the beginning when you were introducing me, it's like it was created as an act of reciprocity of like, oh my God, like you have given me so much. I'm going to open this doorway for you to move through me. And, I have no idea what it's going to achieve because like so much of that requires me just to be hands off and to just go, okay, what wants to come through? And all I know is that this is an act of love. It's an act of gratitude. It's an act of reciprocity. It's an act of honor to the plants, to ancestral wisdom, to magic, to the earth, and this absolute dedication to them and an absolute dedication to the earth, to healing the earth, to healing humanity. And that might sound really, really big and grandiose and, filled with hyperbole, but it's like, not like when I was back in my changemaker days where I was like, let's go change the world. No, this is us like, sitting on our couch and seeing an ancestral pattern play out in an argument with a beloved and noticing that and changing it and feeling the liberation that brings in that moment, feeling the intimacy it sparks and feeling how that liberates all of the ancestors behind us and knowing and trusting that goes out into the collective field. And so it's not about trying to change the whole world. It's about knowing my place in creation and knowing that, just like in a spider web, like there's so much more research coming out now about spiders. And, I think it was Sophie Strand was talking about this recently, that a spider's consciousness actually extends into its web. So when you pull down a spider's web, it actually experiences something like similar to what we would call a stroke, because part of its consciousness has been affected. And so when I look at Wolf and Rose, when I look at the medicine that I'm here to share, it's like I'm a spider as a part of this weaving web where we're all weaving creation together. And I know that what I'm doing here is affecting the web over there. And I trust in that. So I don't try and change everything. It's like, I guess I stay in my lane, right? I'm doing what I'm here to do in this moment. And in this moment, the work with the plants, the work with the blood, the emergent work with menopause, that's what I'm here to do. But it's also a complete surrender to knowing that I will do whatever I'm told to do from that space of my body, from that space of my connection with the divine. And it's letting life lead. So much of, you were talking about awareness earlier, and it's like, I feel like there's a journey through awareness. It's like, this is what I want because I've been told I want it. And then it's like, oh, this is what I want because it fits with my values, right? So it's actually coming from me. And then, oh, this is what I want because this is how I want to feel this way, right? And that's kind of like, the layers we go through. But there's another layer, which is like, well, I've just been going around telling life what I want. But what is it that life wants from me? What is it that life wants from me? And that's the surrender. Like, that's parenthood, yeah? Like, it's, you want the kid, but like that life wants to live through you. And then you surrender your life in a lot of ways. Parent that. And so for me, Wolf and Rose is that. It's like I've been tending it, nurturing it in these early days, but I also know that it's going to take on a life of its own when I start teaching other women these modalities. And then it'll just go off and do its thing. And then I'll be open and ready for the next piece. And yes, in the longer term, I have a sense of what that is, which is, I want to create spaces for healing. And I feel like, again, in this journey that goes around, I want to have a space for change makers. I want to have a space where, I'm back doing regenerative agriculture. I have my market garden here. We've got our chickens and, we eat from friends' farms, and it's a beautiful way to live. And it's also been such a big part in my health healing journey. And so the longer term aspect is, I just want to create spaces for healing, and eventually that will be a physical space. It will be a physical space where people can come and remember who the fuck they are, what their relationship is to life, where they can come and enter that place of, hey, I've been a change maker for so long and I don't know who I am anymore. And you come and you just work the land for a few months. And you remember, you let the earth teach you. You work with your cycle, you work with the plants, and you come home to yourself. And then you'll find that wisdom within yourself that you need to find. I don't want to be teaching people anything. It's just, can I open a space where I hold, the wind back a little bit, whilst the flame of curiosity, that flame of their own inner medicine, can actually build in strength. And that's what all the spaces I create are. They're places and spaces of remembrance of who we are. It's not about telling people anything.
And when you're saying if people need to come back to who they are and they want to know who they actually are again, and one of the options is working the land and getting connected to nature. Another option, like you said, is working with the rose or the cycles. Like, what would that look like in practice in a little bit more detail, if you can go into that a little bit.
Yeah, for example, when people work with the rose in a rose initiation, it's modeled on, a combination of my experiences in Celtic herbalism in the art of herbal simpling, which is, the hedge witches from my own lineage would work with one plant at a time, and they would get to know that one plant really, really well. And how do you do that? You plant it, you grow it, you harvest it, you work with it in many different ways. Like you might burn it as incense, you might make medicines and foods, and you watch it in its changing seasons. And so, being able to access that full life cycle of a plant, just witnessing it. What does it grow beside? What makes it thrive? Where does it not thrive? And then using nature as that mirror, right? So that's how, like, the initial connection with the plant. So that's the Celtic way. And then I've worked a lot in the Amazonian Vegetalista Dieta tradition, which was incredibly healing for me. So working with these plants from the jungle in a long process where you just sit with this plant and everything is taken away from you. You're like, there's no outside stimuli, there's no reading, there's no nothing, there's no speaking. And, it's just you and this plant. And you're practicing presence. You're given this space to come to that's held in like really beautiful energy where you can just put the world down, put all your work down, put all your worries down, put your children and your family and everything down. You're given this space of a week or 2 weeks or a month. And you just go into isolation and you practice presence and you listen. And it'll be really loud at the beginning. All the stories that are running, all the programs that are in your mind of like, oh my God, I need to do this. Oh my God, like how often we distract ourselves with our phone, with our computers, with our beloveds, with food. As soon as we cook lunch, we're like, what are we having for dinner? As soon as dinner's over, oh my God, do I have enough in for breakfast in the morning? Oh my God, then I have to get the kids ready. Like, we're busy. And so this is about taking time out of time. And it works the same with the menstrual cycle. I teach this process of Moon Lodge that was passed down to me by Carmen Vincent, a medicine woman from Ecuador. And again, it's also based on dieta in the way I hold it. So while you bleed, you go into a space where you don't work, you don't talk, you don't cook, you don't do anything, right? And so this is like the classic journey of descent. It's the archetypal journey of separation from the world. It's like the hero's or the heroine's journey, but like you're physically doing it. You're putting everything aside and you're consciously walking into it, not just from, an archetypal point of view, but physically as well. You're stripping yourself of, it's like Inanna descending into the underworld in the mythology, taking off all of her clothes so she goes into the underworld naked. That's what we do at plant diets. That's what we do at Moon Lodge. That's what we do with these sacred ceremonies like Sundance and Moon Dance. They're all the same. We're going into the darkness. We're consciously going, there's something that I need to work on. We go in there with that intention. And what we'll notice in the run up to any of these ceremonies, life will get really loud. It'll get really difficult. Everything that needs to come to the surface will come to the surface, just like your premenstrual phase. All of your unprocessed trauma, unprocessed grievances will come up in your premenstrual phase because they're asking you to alchemize them in your inner fires. It's the same with a rose initiation. It's the same with your menstrual cycle. It's the same with Moon Dance. It's the same with all of these sacred ceremonies. And so if you can bring your awareness and bring that intention in of like, wow, I've got this fucking rage about my relationship with the masculine, whatever it is, you bring that into the darkness. You bring that into the stillness and you sit with it, and what am I finding underneath that? What is the goal that's underneath this anger? What is the goal that's underneath this pain? And we're going back to the origin. Like Carmita, one of my teachers, she's always saying it's all about the origin. Tantra, yoga, all these practices, what are we doing? We're trying to go back to source. So what is the origin of this pattern in my life? And we're just sitting there and we're just witnessing with loving, compassion, awareness. And we're allowing everything to come to the surface, the pain, the grief, the brokenness. So much of the time we're holding it together. A diet, Moon Lodge, sacred ceremony, we're creating a conscious space to allow yourself to just go in and break. Just break. Let yourself go.
Because it is all within us, right?
Yeah. And it's like, so much of the time we're afraid to break because we don't have the support. And so when I'm teaching...
At the time, right?
Yeah.
You don't have the support, you don't have the time to let yourself go there.
Yeah. And so, when I work with women or couples, right, it's like, how can we create this space as a family for the woman to take this time? Because the children recognize, the community recognizes, and the husband recognizes that when the woman rests, she gets in touch with her oracle. She gets in touch with all of the divine wisdom that will shape our reality. We can become co-creators with the divine as a couple. And our children will learn what it is to live within the rhythms of nature. We'll learn how to trust that there is a different way of living outside of the patriarchy, outside of capitalism, outside of these timelines that we're living. And we're imprinting in them, through our lived experience, a different way of being. And, this goes far beyond telling them or watching things together. It's a lived experience of like, oh yeah, when mom is like this, like for some of my clients, it's like, yeah, like they've got 5-year-old sons and they're like, no, my mom's bleeding today. She's wearing her red dress, so you can't come over and play, but I can come to your house, right? Like, these are 5-year-old boys saying this, and they're like, oh, mommy's bleeding today. I'm going to bring her a cup of tea, right? Like, and that's how we change. Like, the whole world is in these small moments. And so... And
it becomes second nature to them, right? They grow up and it's just normal for them.
It's just normal.
Don't question that.
Yeah, but they're taught to question, right?
Yeah.
They're taught to question. They're taught about the inquiry. What does this feel like to you? How does this compare to your friend's experience? What does this look like compared to what you see on TV? And you teach them to be naturally inquisitive and curious, right? Because if you just tell them this is the way it is, then, or even if they just grow up, oh, this is just the way it is, without that questioning mind, then their rebellion will be to go the other way, right? It's like when we see hippies having like, hotshot lawyers as kids. But to go back to, the process of diet, it's in that darkness. We've got this archetypal pattern of separation, and then you've got like this moment of surrender when it gets really noisy and you're like, I can't do this. I'm busy. I have to go back. And then you break through that, and there's this spaciousness that comes. There's this deep rest that comes. There's a renewal that comes. And as women in our cycle, when we allow ourselves to drop into that space, that's when we change our lives. And after the rest, there's a spontaneous rising, right? If you just breathe for a second and you breathe in and then you breathe out, that breath just returns. And so that's the same with our energy. It's the same with our creativity. And it's in that empty, pregnant void that life can communicate with us. Our ancestors can communicate with us because we're still, because we're quiet, because we've stripped out distraction. Like we're not eating salt or fats or sugars or meats. We're sitting primarily in the darkness, in quietude. We're only doing very gentle, slow movements. And so we are heightening our senses to commune either with the blood or with the plant. And in so doing, we're actually communing with another form of the divine, another form of source. And when we do that, we rest, and then there's a renewal, and then we receive a vision. This is why, native cultures do vision quests. It's the same archetypal journey. And we receive a vision. And then as our energy rises, naturally there's a rising in energy after our bleed. That's when we can go out into the world and then bring that knowledge with us, whether it's after the bleed or whether it's after a diet or whether it's after a vision quest. And to me, the insights I explored when I was bleeding regularly was that, if you look at Sundance ceremony, if you look at Moon Lodge, or if you look at Vision Quest ceremony, my belief is that these ceremonies were created so that men could experience what it's like to bleed. They could experience, like in the Sundance, they could experience that pain of surrender to give birth to themselves, to give birth to life, to bleed on the earth, and Sundance you're like hooked through the chest and hang from a tree, and it's about, you're dancing and dancing and dancing so that you pull yourself from that tree. And, you know, the experience of that, it's a very visceral, embodied experience of life and death, of birth and death. And, you know, there's this inner standing in me that so much of the time, like if women want to find God, we just go inside, we go to birth, we go to the blood. And then if men want to find that feminine, you know, I believe, you know, I may be completely wrong, but I believe that these ceremonies of vision quest, you know, where men go out, well, it's traditionally men, now the women do too, they go out on the land for 4 days and 4 nights and they fast in nature, because men go out into nature to find their connection with the feminine, whereas we are the feminine, so we just go inside, right? And it's the same at Sweat Lodge and Temescal. It's like we create these little wombs with a fire on the inside, and we go and we sit in the darkness and we sing and we drum to the heartbeat of mother to remember. And so to me, like, I work with a lot of these ancient wisdom traditions because a lot of it was lost in my own lineage. But what these working with these lineages, it's not about emulating them, it's about, you know, they trigger the inner remembrance of your own lineage, of your own innate wisdom.
That's amazing.
And so much of the work I do is just, you know, helping other people remember what's already in them. It's always, I mean, that's why it's shamanic, because it's about direct experience.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't about like reading a book about the divine feminine or reading a book about the rose. Yes, you can read them, and that might ignite a code in you in your own embodied experience during the process. And, you know, for me, it's like when I'm looking for a teacher, you know, I'm looking for a teacher who has embodied what they're doing. How did they live? What are their relationships like? Are they vibrant? Are they vital? Are they happy? Are they contributing in beautiful ways to the world? And I don't mean like creating something big, but like in their energy. Like, are they disrupting, you know, the paradigm with the amount of love they're carrying? Are they in communion with the land? You know, are they committed to healing? And for me, it's like, you know, it's returning to these aspects is what Wolf and Rose is about for me. And, you know, as I move through this threshold of menopause, which, like, holy shit, you think like Moon Lodge or plant ceremonies or birth is like, or a near-death experience as an initiation, like,
wait for menopause.
Because it just, you never know when it's going to end. Like that moment where I was like asking the surgeon, like, is it ever going to end? Like, you just don't know. Like, it's been 3 years of just being on fire for me. Like, just, you know, like awake in the middle of the night. And it's like, it's not permanent, but like I go through these big moments. And your whole entire relationship to self, any tiny bit of unprocessed trauma is brought to the surface in menopause. It's like, I'm going to make everything so loud so that you finally address it for the second half of your life. Who is it that you want to be for your life? Because now is the time. This is why so many women leave their husbands or quit their jobs or whatever when it comes to this midlife transition. But I also don't believe that everyone needs to leave their husband, because so much of the stuff that comes up in this sacred threshold is about our own relationship to self, our own relationship to intimacy, to sex. And when, for example, sex is no longer for procreation, what is the role of sex? What is the role of intimacy? How do I want to be loved? How do I want to love? You know, what is intimacy to me? What is important to me? How do I want to be? And if we have been doing the work, we can really ride the waves of it. It's still going to be challenging. But if we've not been doing the work, it's going to be really fucking hard, because this is like D-Day. This is it, you know, like, who are you going to be for the rest of your life? And it's so much around your health. Like in Chinese medicine, they call it a golden opportunity to come back into balance, right? Like you're out of balance with your yang and your yin, right? Like you've been yang, 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 yang. It's like mothering, right? People think that mothering is like a very yin thing. Now, to give birth is yin, right? Like, but yang, mothering is yang. Like you're looking outside, you're looking after, you're doing. Most women reach midlife completely out of balance in yang, and they crash land into midlife, exactly like they crash land into their menstruation. And so your relationship to your premenstrual phase will be how your experience of perimenopause will be. But it'll just keep going, right? Like for years, potentially. And you just never know when it's going to start or when it's going to end. Like, but at sometimes it's beautiful because you don't have like these ones in the same way. Some women do. But there's a new way of being in the world that's being birthed. And all of the things that you thought were important before, sometimes they just like, oh, it doesn't really matter anymore. Why does it matter, you know? And why did it matter? You know, and so for me, I'm about to take a year to just go, okay, what does life want from me? What do I want? You know, and to spend time in my creativity, to allow the space for what wants to come next to come through. And so much of the time we don't give ourselves that because we're so caught up with, I can't, I don't have time, or in our society, I don't have the money, you know, like it's a very real prospect. You know, this is why there's work to be done on the collective level, on our workplaces. Like, you know, women should be able to take a sabbatical at this time of their lives, right? A supported sabbatical, like when they have maternity leave, because they will come back more wise, more creative, more all-knowing, and more all-powerful than before. And, you know, just like after menstruation, they will come back with messages for the collective. But, you know, we have made menopause taboo on purpose to strip women of their power. Women are, you know, when I first started talking about menopause, like even with women, like you could just see like the shame just like shudder through them. And I would be so unashamed within it and like having a hot flush here and getting all red.
It's like birth, right? It's the same thing. People don't really
and
talk
menstruation.
about it.
It's all
menstruation, exactly.
Phase, right? And we don't even not talk about it. We shame it. We make fun of it. We strip women of their power in it. We medicalize it. Birth is not a medical experience.
No.
And menstruation is not a medical experience. And this experience of menopause is not a medical experience. But what have we done? We give women birth control. We make them give birth in hospital. We tell them how to give birth. We strip them of their power. And then when it comes to menopause, we're like, dose them up on hormones, right?
Yeah.
The three places in a woman's life where she meets her power, where she experiences her power, where she can finally embrace her power, we make them into taboos and we cloak them in shame so that women won't even go there. And, you know, when I think about one of the things I'm here to do, it's to strip that story back. Just like when I was at Think Hack Change, you know, and I would be talking about plastics. I'm talking about menopause, right? I'm talking about birth because, you know what? Women's bodies give birth. Doctors do not give birth.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason women experience so many challenges in birth is because they're rushed, because they're in the wrong environment, because they have lost trust with the fact that they give birth, that they are powerful.
Because they weren't educated around how they can actually give birth. They were told.
Yes, we have lost the lineages.
Yeah,
we've lost the lineages of midwives, of mothers who are there when their daughters give birth, when grandmothers are there, when sisters and aunties are there. And, you know, we've lost this. And, you know, these are the things. Like, if you want to change the entire world, you change birth. Because upon birth, women meet their power. Men know their place in the world. And children come into the world knowing they're safe. They come in song, in purity, in love, in safety. And their birth imprints do not run their entire life unconsciously. They're not rushed. They're not like straight into the patriarchy. Like when we rush a birth, we're literally encoding that person to be in a hurry for the rest of their lives, to fit into a patriarchal system for the rest of their lives. It's that deeply ingrained in our DNA, in our psychological patterning from birth. And, you know, even before that, when we're in the womb, like, does that woman feel empowered? Does she feel safe? Does she feel held? Is she sung to by her sisters? Is she, you know, connecting with herself during that time? Does she have time to relax, or is she working right up to the end?
Yeah.
Right? And so if we allow birth to shift, our entire way of being in this world will change.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the blood. It's the same with, this experience of menopause, right? Like when a man, for example, can understand the menstrual cycle, when he can drop into that same rhythm with you in relationship, and your children can do the same, they see through embodied experience in their own lives how life can be different, how they can be a co-creator with life. Men will understand more deeply their role in relationship to the feminine, and these archetypal patterns through the different phases in the cycle, the traumas that arise, the arguments that arise will arise at the exact moment they're meant to, so that he can drop into his feminine or his masculine, and you can do the same, and you can see where are we out of balance within ourselves and each other. And really, relationship is all just about us bringing each other back to balance.
Yeah.
And, like the menstrual cycle for me is a map. It's like the ultimate map back home. It's within us. And the irony is that the rhythm of the menstrual cycle will be running your relationship, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
So once you have that awareness, everything can change.
It supports you. Yeah.
And, and it supports him, right? Like, so for my beloved, when I was bleeding regularly, he would be the one who knew his role. Like, his parents might ask us to go to dinner, and he wouldn't even say it to me. He'd be like, no, she can't do it. He's not going to come in and ask me when I'm bleeding, hey, do you want to go out to this thing? It wouldn't even occur to him to ask me. His role is to be like, I'm going to keep them all away from you so you can bleed in peace. And then he'll see where his wounding is. But, that experience, we hit up against all our own wounding. Like, when we first started doing this, he was like, what do you mean I have to like cook for you and serve you and do all this? And it brought up all of his like, why do I have to do this for you? And it's like, oh, well, this is all the invisible labor that you do during the rest of the month. And also there's this like fear. He was like, I don't want to do this because like, what if you become too powerful? What do I have to do what you say? And, there's all of these pieces. And then in the feminine, it's like, I can't go into Moon Lodge. I can't drop everything for 3 days because the entire fucking world's going to fall apart. And therefore, you're in this conflict consistently, unconsciously with your beloved, where you don't feel supported in an unconscious way, because realistically, you should be able to drop things for 3 days and come back and nothing's a disaster. Because if it's all a disaster when you come back, then you're the only one holding it together. And that's too much for us. And that, as the feminine, is not what we want. We want to be able to rest into ourselves. We want to be able to rest into that spaciousness. But if we think we have to hold it all together, we're going to subconsciously resent our beloved. And then we'll just be, subconsciously just like taking over in the spring and summer of our cycle. The first half of our cycle, we'll just be doing everything, go, 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 have everything like shit together. Everything's organized. And then we'll just be bitter ass. We'll be so bitter in that premenstrual phase because it catches up on us and we're tired and we don't want to do it all by ourselves. And then we won't give ourselves permission to go into the bleed because we're like, no, it's not worth it. Because then it'll just be a disaster after I come out, and there'll be even more to do. Like, when you take a week off work and you come back and there's like 400 emails, you're like, what's the point? Like when I was in the corporate world, I didn't take more than a week off in 5 years because I was like, what's the point? It's just going to be worse. That's the illness of this linear patriarchal time. It's not supposed to be that way. You look at the earth, there's spring, there's summer, there's autumn, there's winter. The world rests when there's winter. Well, the world's meant to rest when there's winter. You're meant to get bored. You're meant to go into that space of I've nothing to do, because what's born from boredom? Creativity. What is creativity? Yeah. Creativity is creation. What is creation? Creation is God. What is art? Art is you manifesting God into the world. And where does that come from? Boredom, right? And it's like, like the emptiness that we're so afraid of is the fertile soil for everything new that wants to be born into the world.
Yeah. I've actually listened to a podcast of Brené Brown recently, and she was saying the same thing. She was like, I've written all my books, like just watching random TV shows that just bored me to death, because that's when I have my greatest ideas. And I really love that, you know, it's like allow yourself to be bored and, you know, what may arise. And my older son, he's 6 now, he started saying, Mommy, I'm bored. Mommy, I'm bored. And I'm like, that's great. Like, what can come out of that? Like, let yourself be bored, you know? So rather than making that, oh, you shouldn't be bored, or go and do something, or go and play, or do this, or do that, I'm just like, that's awesome. Just see what wants to happen out of that, you know?
But that requires us to be able to hold ourselves, right, as parents. And what we see so much of the time nowadays is like parents don't have the time to hold their child through boredom, because it requires maybe holding them through a tantrum, through difficult emotions. And so we plunk the TV on, or we, you know, we put them in another activity because we're busy, right? And like, this is not to shame parents. Like, parents have a hard time. Again, this is one of the reasons why I consciously decided not to be a parent, is because it's, you know, there's so many things that we have to do to keep up in this world. And, you know, for me, it's like, how can I start creating my life? And if I was a parent, how can I start instilling in my children more spaciousness? Because, like, I deserve that. We all deserve that. Like, rest. Rest is the most underrated medicine on this planet. We will sit and we will go to hospital and we'll have surgeries and we will do all of these things and we'll take all the pills, but we won't rest.
We usually rest when it's too late, right? We rest when we really need to rest, or when our body just shuts down and there is no other option anymore. That's when we rest, but not before that.
And this is the classic thing where the day you get your holidays, you'll get sick.
That's exactly what happened to me just at Christmas. I literally worked on Wednesday as my last day, and on Thursday I was sick, and I was like,
and it happens time and time again. And, you know, my beloved, like, he quit his job because we're going away, and I challenged him to quit it earlier because he's got this story of like, I'll be bored. And I was like, good.
Yeah.
But he was terrified of it, you know? And and he quit, and then he got sick. And he's tired. And like, for someone who was getting up at 5:30 every morning, sometimes he's sleeping until 10 o'clock. And he's like, whoa, what is this? And I'm like, because you just never let yourself rest before. This is actually your body coming back into balance. It's like, we think we're not tired. We think we're okay. But it's only when we stop. The body goes, oh my God, here we go, you know?
And it is only when you're well that you can keep up with that. That's what I find. Like, when I'm really well and when I'm really healthy, you know, you can do a million things a day and whatever you need to do. Not that I'm saying that that's a good thing, but you can do it. But then as soon as something is slightly off, that's when it starts to get difficult, you know. But you still kind of have to, or at least you think you have to keep going that way.
But this is one of the tragedies of the world that we live in, is that we wait until we get sick to rest. And, you know, that was the life story I had. And for me now, it's like, you know, how can I live in a way where I don't have to wait till my body screams till I pay attention? How can I cultivate space every single day to be in some form of quietude and stillness, to listen to what it is that my body needs and desires and act upon that? And that requires so much love for self and for the work that you're here to do in the world, because, you know, you can focus on the work, but if you're not loving yourself, then you're never going to be able to fulfill the work that you're here to do in the world. And so how can I cultivate a life where it's slow enough that I can listen, that it's restful enough, that, like, for me personally, how can my life be slow enough and restful enough so that, you know, my body is still recovering? And I didn't even talk about half the stuff that's happened to my body, right? And like, my body is still recovering from that. And how can I be, you know, really loving to all those inner parts that are still kind of trying to, you know, get past all of this? And so for me, cultivating a life that was filled with peace was incredibly important. But to my younger self, peace equaled boredom. So I would choose chaos. I would choose busy. And that was because I was still living from my trauma, right? I wouldn't have been able to rest into this life here. I'd have been like, no, this is fucked. This is boring. Whereas now I'm like,
well, and
oh.
it's the comparison with others that you spoke about at the beginning, right? Like the people that you're striving to be like when you're younger, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, and so much of it has to do with our nervous system capacity. Like I wouldn't have been able to sit in stillness because it wasn't safe for my nervous system. And so it requires building a capacity. And it's just like, I would never have been with the beloved I'm with now because I would have thought it was boring. Because for me, love meant arguments and ups and downs and spikes and chemicals and, you know, chemistry. And it's like, well, is that love or is that trauma? And, you know, that's, I think, one of the biggest, you know, misconceptions we have. And, you know, for me, it's like, is love going out and wearing like a big fancy pair of high heel shoes? Or is it just coming home and putting on your slippers that have holes in them, but being really cozy? Yeah. And, you know, and that might seem unremarkable, but what can be more remarkable than just being able to rest into who you fully are? And that's what love is. To be able to rest so fully into who you are and be so fully seen in that version of you, in your slippers with holes in, and be accepted and loved and met and heard and seen in that. And to know that you're worthy in the doing nothing. Hey, that's everything.
I love that.
And like, we can live from such a deep space of love and acceptance and then compassion, right? We can meet the people we're working with. Such deep compassion. Because when they're reactive, when they're, you know, maybe abusive or this or that, you know, like you don't have to take abuse from people, but you can understand where people are coming from in certain situations. You can have compassion. You can respond instead of react. Like when I look back on my youth, and we were talking about awareness earlier, it's like I was just one big giant trigger, you know? I was a big trigger and I was just reacting. I was angry, I was shouting. You know, like I know my ex-partner was very abusive, but I was also abusive in my own way because I was so unaware. I was manipulative, right? I was manipulative. I lied because I was so afraid to be seen, you know? And like that's such a wounded maiden way of being. Before we've been initiated into our inner mother, you know, we're in that wounded maiden. We're waiting for some knight in shining armor to come rescue us. But the truth is that we are the prince and we are the maiden, you know. And it's that inner masculine that was so lost in my own life, you know. When we find that within ourselves, we stop pushing ourselves so hard because we feel supported internally.
Avis, talking about that work, you know, and how you are supporting other people as well through their healing, how important do you think that deep healing is in the world that we are living in today?
There's nothing else that we're here for. You know, to me, it's very simple. You know, we're born and then we die. And in between, we're learning to love. And we're healing all those places within ourselves where we're not open to giving and receiving love. And that's to ourselves, to each other, to the earth. And that remembrance of love, that remembrance of who we are is healing. Healing is remembering our connection to the earth. Healing is remembering that our bodies are divine and holy and of the earth. Healing is being able to meet another human being without the veil of your trauma and your stories getting in the way of that connection. Healing is being able to look at someone who is suffering and drop into the compassionate space of your heart instead of reacting. Healing is being able to create shifts and changes in your local community, in your family, from a place of deep love. So for me, healing is the foundation of everything. And healing is not a destination. It is not something that we kind of try to do. It's a way of being in the world. It's a way of walking in balance. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of looking internally and seeing when we fall out of balance and calling ourselves back to center. It's a way of being. And for me, it is the most important way of being because it's to walk the path of healing is to walk the path of love, is to walk the path of the earth, the beauty way, as the indigenous people will say. And, really, like if you meet that place of death in your lifetime, when somebody that you love is dying all of a sudden, or you lose a child, or something traumatic happens in your life, you remember that. You remember that nothing else matters. You remember in that moment that all that matters is I love you, I love you, I love you. That's all that ever matters. But we forget. And sometimes it takes these really challenging moments of, losing the ones that we love, of losing our health, of losing all our wealth, of all our safety, to find ourselves in the bottom of that darkness, to realize that, the only thing that calls us back up and out is love. Mm-hmm. So it's all healing.
Avis, thank you so much. It's been an absolutely incredible conversation with you. I've got a million more questions that I would love to ask you. There is just so much in what you've been sharing with us today, and like my head is just going at 1,000,000 miles an hour right now. Thank you so much for your beautiful wisdom that you've been sharing with us today.
It's been a deep pleasure. There's nothing more beautiful than just showing up with no idea of what you're going to speak about and just meeting the moment. So thank you for opening that space.
Thank you. You've been wonderful as always. So the 3 pearls of wisdom that stood out for me today. The first one is that one of the biggest journeys that we're here to do is to figure out what is love. That is a huge one, and I think it's a beautiful one. And as you said at the end there, it's like, if you rest into who you are, and if you're fully seen in the version that you are, that is what love is, And if you can arrive at that point, that's really beautiful. The second point is when you were talking about, the premenstrual phase and how everything that hasn't been integrated in your life and hasn't been worked through in your life does come up in that phase, and that the female cycle is really showing up all of the things that need to be worked through. And as well as showing up the things that need to be worked through, it also shows up a lot of the opportunities and what you're supposed to bring into the world. So I really love that. And then the third thing that you said, which I found really beautiful, is, a lot of the time we are asking, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? But we never really, switch it around and flip it and say, what is it that life wants from us? Why are we here? What is it that life wants us to contribute in this life and on this journey? So they are the 3 main pieces, besides all of the other amazing things that you've mentioned today and that you've talked about.
Beautiful.
So, Avis, if people would like to get in touch with you, tell us what the best way to find you is.
Yeah, beautiful. You can connect with me on the website, wolfandrose.co, or on Instagram at Avis Mulhall, or at She Is Wolf and Rose, or you can email me at hello@wolfandrose.co, and I'll come back to you. I'm always really keen to just have a chat with people and share a little bit about the wisdom and the medicine that I offer.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real treat, and I'm glad we got around to it at last.
I know, me too. We made it finally. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I really hope that you got something out of this episode today. Avis has really opened up, told us a big chunk of her life story and how she ended up, working in Wolf and Rose with the medicines that she's working right now. She's given us so much from her work and her wisdom. So I really hope that some of that resonated with you. Please make sure that you share your podcast with your family, with your friends, or anyone you think might benefit from this information and from the wisdom that we've heard today. I really hope this episode brought some sunshine to your soul. I'm sending love and light your way, and until next time.